What an absolutely extraordinary collection of presenters here we have this weekend. Our final speaker this morning is Professor Ricardo Silvestre. Professor Silvestre received his PhD in philosophy from the University of Montreal. Currently, he lives in Brazil, that's where the music comes from, where he is professor of philosophy in the graduate program of the Federal University of Paraíba. Am I pronouncing that? Paraíba. Thank you very much. And also serves as adjunct professor of philosophy at the University of Campina, Grande. Did I do better with that one? His fields include philosophical logic, epistemology, philosophy of religion, and Indian philosophy. Would you please join me in welcoming Professor Ricardo Silvestre?
Good morning. Well, so I'm here to talk about dualism, which shall be done inside or as part of an attempt to philosophically examine the problem or the project of explaining consciousness. But I'll have to say two things before I start. First of all, I'd like to thank Bob and his team for having organized this amazing conference. Thank you. And second, that it has been a challenge to prepare these presentations. First, because consciousness studies and philosophy of mind are not really my fields. My fields are logic and philosophy of religion. And second, because of the nature of the conference. It's always a challenge to speak to such a diverse audience with different backgrounds. That's why I try to keep things at a very elementary level. I don't know if I succeeded. But anyway, I had a great time preparing the presentation, and I hope you'll enjoy it. Once more. Okay, so I start, of course, speaking about explaining consciousness. So from a very, let's say, general and perhaps naive level or perspective, you can say that we all agree that consciousness should be explained by the methods which are typical of the sciences. After all, science has explained quite successfully many important aspects of the natural world, and consciousness seems to be part of this natural world. It is a property of natural living organisms like us, human beings. It is also widely agreed that science involves what we call naturalism, the idea that in order to explain phenomena, science should appeal only to natural entities, forces, principles, etc. But this has some consequences, some implications. First of all, that understanding consciousness by pursuing the methods of the sciences would be the same as pursuing a naturalist project with respect to consciousness. This is the first consequence. The second one is that dualism, the view that there is an immaterial and substantial self, which is the bearer of consciousness, will be inconsistent with science or with scientific practice, and therefore will have no role to play in the project of rationally explaining consciousness. Okay, so my purpose here will be to philosophically examine this claim, the claim that dualism has no role to play in the project of rationally explaining consciousness. In other words, I'll try to disclose the basic assumptions and the basic concepts which are involved in this claim. So I'll have to deal with those three concepts, of course: naturalism or physicalist naturalism, I will say in a while what that is, explanation, and dualism. And as a positive contribution, or as a speculation, as I prefer to say, I'll introduce a new concept which I call methodological dualism. Due to time, I'll have to skip many important details, okay? An excuse for that, but I hope to be able to provide you with a broad picture of what is involved or what's implied in this claim. All right, once more. Okay, so I start with naturalism. So it's not easy to say what naturalism is. There are a lot of definitions, and scholars usually are not as clear as we want. But here is a tentative definition, according to which naturalism is the thesis that everything that exists, be it an object, kind, property, law, force, or principle, is natural or is included in the natural world. Scholars usually make a distinction between ontological naturalism and methodological naturalism. This definition is a definition of ontological naturalism. It is ontological because it is a claim about what exists in reality. Methodological naturalism, in its turns, makes no such a claim. It is concerned with how we should conduct scientific practice. That in order to explain phenomena, science should only appeal to natural objects, kinds, properties, etc. So the idea is that science should be concerned with methodological naturalism and not with ontological naturalism. And it's reasonable that you think so, because in some way we can say that explanations should come first, and ontology should come after. What I mean is like that. Suppose that you have a phenomena that has to be explained. You have several theories which are trying to explain the phenomena. So once we have a winner, a theory that explains better than the others, so we are going to look or try to see what are the implications ontologically of the theory. Okay, so it makes sense to say that science should be concerned mainly with methodological naturalism. But the definition I have just given perhaps might be accused of being circular, because I have to say what natural is in order to say what naturalism is. And here again we have many options. Okay, we have what is called scientific naturalism, for instance, which says that the natural are those entities, property, laws, forces, and principles disclosed or studied by science, or by ideal science. Again, also, there is a kind of circularity here, because we are told that science should be concerned with the natural, but we define the natural in terms of science. All right? I'm not totally against circular definitions. They might be useful, and I'm going to come back to this definition later. But anyway, because of that, most scholars agree that the most promising path is to define the natural in terms of the physical. So naturalism, So natural objects, kinds, property, laws, etc. will be simply physical objects, kinds, properties, etc. But here again, it's not easy to say what a physical object is. Again, we have several choices, several answers. Each one of them has its own problems. For instance, if we say that a physical object is whatever can be sensed, we might ask, sensed by whom? Different living beings and different human beings, they have different sensory abilities, so this definition seems to be too subjective. Okay? So I won't go through all of them, but anyway, if we do define the natural in terms of the physical, naturalism turns into physicalism, or into physicalist naturalism, which is the thesis that everything is physical. All right? Here again, philosophers, they disagree about the best way to explain the expression everything is physical. So that's why philosopher David Deleuze, he proposed to use the notion of supervenience to capture the minimal or the core commitment of physicalism. Okay? So he explains the notion with the help of a dot matrix picture analogy, which is quite useful for us to understand it. So a dot matrix picture has global properties. It might be a picture of a lion, for instance. But yet, all there is to the picture is dots and non-dots. So we say that those global properties, they supervene on the local or micro dot properties. So in other ways, we say that no two pictures could differ in their global properties without differing somewhere in their micro dot properties. So here the idea is that the mental supervenes on the physical. So if you use like the same definition here, and this is the best definitions for supervenience, we're going to say that this means the fact that the mental supervenes on the physical. It means that no two possible worlds can be identical in their physical properties, but differ in their mental properties. Okay? With that notion at hand, we define supervenience physicalism, or like David Deleuze called it, minimal physicalism, which is the thesis that no possible world can be physically identical to the current world without being identical to it in all respects. See that this is a very heavy metaphysical definition. In fact, the thesis that everything is physical is a metaphysical definition. You can't prove it. You can't prove it from the scientific, from the experiential point of view. It's something that is beyond the physical. The thesis is that everything is physical. And in order to make this thesis clear, we get a very heavy metaphysical definition, which uses the concept of possibility, which is a metaphysical concept, and the concept of possible worlds. I come back to that later. All right, now we might ask to what extent consciousness studies is influenced by physicalism. Okay, I'm going to just use two quotations here just to give you an idea of what goes on. So this is a quote by philosopher John Searle, where he says something very, very heavy. He compares physicalism, or materialism, as he calls it, with religion. And he says that, like most traditional religions, physicalism, or materialism, as he calls it, is accepted without question. It provides a framework within which other questions can be posed, addressed, and answered. And someone who seems to agree with him is Bernard Baars, the originator of this influential theory of consciousness, the global workspace theory. He says that there is no reason to doubt the empirical status of consciousness. So the fact is that work done in consciousness studies seems to be very strongly influenced by physicalism. And this can be said for sure about the work done inside philosophy of mind, okay? And it should be clear also that what at stake here is not methodological naturalism or methodological physicalism. It's ontological physicalism. Usually, at least inside the philosophy of mind, people are concerned here really with ontology. All right. Okay, good. But I'm going to go quickly through that. We might ask if we accept, say, the worldview of physicalism. We might ask how it's going to explain consciousness. So people agree that it should be a reductionist explanation. The same way, say, that the liquidity of water is explained from the microproperties of collection of H2O molecules. So in the same way, mental properties should be explained in terms of brain or physical properties. All right, even though some people call themselves non-reductivist physicalists, at least we can say that this is the standard view regarding explanation when we consider physicalism. Okay, I go quickly through that. Some people, there's a growing feeling, we can say, that this kind of explanation is doomed to failure. And there are at least three ways we can look at it. First one, from a, say, pre-philosophical and intuitive view. Basically, we feel that physicalism can't explain some basic aspects of life. And here we have a quote by Schrödinger. But you can take a look also from a factual perspective, that we have 50 years of attempts of explaining from a physicalist point of view consciousness, or at least some aspects of consciousness, and many people see that there is a failure, that they weren't able to explain many aspects like phenomenal consciousness or qualia, like Martin explained to us, intentionality, even rational thought. I could add to this the unity of consciousness and subjectivity. So many people, this is not a consensus, okay, but many people believe that we can't have, at least there wasn't success in terms of explaining these aspects. But there is also another perspective that we can take, which is a conceptual perspective. So according to this perspective, it's not only that these theories weren't able so far to explain those aspects, but they can't explain those aspects. So I'm going to explain this argument. It's quite interesting, and just to give you an idea of what goes on inside this philosophical debate. Okay? So this is an argument for the impossibility of a physicalist explanation based on qualia, which Martin kindly explained, so I won't explain it. So it has 6 premises and those 2 conclusions. The first one is just a restatement of physicalism. And here we see the consequences of this definition being very heavy from a metaphysical point of view. The heavier a definition or the heavier a thesis is, the easier is to refute it. Okay? And here we're going to see that it's quite easy to refute it. So here's the definition of physicalism. No possible world can be physically identical to W, where W is our current world, without being identical to it in all respects. So the second one, John, it might be Ricardo, it doesn't matter, has qualitative conscious experience in W, in our world. The third one, and there is a possible world, say Z, which is physically identical to W, However, in this world, John is a zombie. Okay, we are just saying that zombies are possible, and most of us agree on that zombies, we know that zombies don't exist, okay? But most of us agree that they are possible. I mean, it's possible that they exist, they could exist. So this is a statement of that there's a possible world in which John is a zombie. But in this world, John has no qualitative conscious experience. He has no qualia. This is the philosophical definition of a zombie. A zombie, it behaves like a normal human being, but there's nothing inside. A zombie has no qualia. That's just a definition, okay? But from that we get a contradiction. We get that Z is not identical to W in all respects, because in Z, John has no qualia. But we get that Z is identical to W in all respects from the definition of physicalism. So due to this contradiction, we can conclude that no physicalist theory of consciousness can explain qualia because of the inconsistency. You can't explain one thing from another thing if both of them are contradictory, right? Okay. So suppose that we agree with that, okay, that there is this failure. We might ask what to do. What to do? So we have some options. We might think of giving up, like some people do think, okay? The problem is too hard for our limited minds. We can perhaps deny that there is such a thing as qualia, as purpose, as intentions, and so on and so forth, which is pretty absurd. Or we can, and this is the option I defend here, we can embrace what philosopher Karl Popper called theoretical pluralism, which is the idea that a plurality of theories is necessary for science to be empirical. Or in other words, and from a more general perspective, rationality itself requires a plausibility of ideas, values, and ways of life. So if you take this seriously, there is no excuse for restricting ourselves to physicalist theories. Rationality itself requires that we open up our minds and you give a chance to non-physicalist theories. So with that thought in mind, I now finally go to dualism. Okay, now I start speaking about dualism. So usually when we speak about dualism, and that's the way that I define it, we think of what people call substance dualism. That's the way I defined it. So that dualism is the view that there is a substantial and immaterial self, which is not identical to the body and is the bearer of personal identity and consciousness. But there are at least two weaker forms of dualism. They are called property dualism and predicate dualism. Property dualism is the thesis that there are two essentially different kinds of property. Okay, property, in the word, physical properties and mental properties. Predicate dualism just says that psychological predicates or mental predicates are not reducible to physicalist predicates, and therefore they are essential for a full description of the world. Two observations are in order here. First, that property dualism and predicate dualism, they are compatible with physicalism. That's why most of property dualist philosophers, they are also physicalists. And the second, and predicate dualism, of course, is also compatible. And the second observation is that substance dualism and property dualism are ontological theses. They make a claim about what exists in the world. In its turn, predicate dualism makes no such a claim, it's just a linguistic thesis. Okay? Another important observation is that, again, many times when we speak about substance dualism, we think of Cartesian dualism. René Descartes, he defined the soul, for instance, as an entity that doesn't occupy a spatial-temporal position. But many people disagree on that. For instance, Kant and Augustine, they thought that the soul does occupy a spatial position. And nowadays we have a great variety of dualist approaches. So in order to give you just an idea of this variety, I'm going to speak about two dualist approaches, but still physicalist approaches. The first one is by philosopher David Chalmers. It's a very interesting idea he had in 1995. His basic idea is that since we can't give a reductive explanation to consciousness, let's give a non-reductive one. In other words, let's take conscious experience as a fundamental term, talking about theories, or as a fundamental entity of the world. So, and he says that where there is a fundamental property, there are fundamental laws. So if you take this seriously, we are going to have psychological laws, we are going to have psychophysical laws, okay? And together, these laws will explain consciousness. So it will be a non-reductive kind of explanation. So what's interesting here is that because his idea really is to extend the notion of natural, so as to include consciousness. And he gives the example of electromagnetism, which in the 19th century, people weren't able to explain this kind of phenomena. So what Maxwell and others did was to take electromagnetic forces, electromagnetic charges, as something fundamental. So the ontology of physics was expanded. So he's proposing something alike to that, but now regarding conscious experience. And it is an instance of property dualism, okay? So it is still a physicalist approach. All right, it's 5 minutes. Okay, you can go. Okay, we can criticize Chalmers in the following way. To many, it is inconceivable that experiences be ownerless. Okay, there cannot be an experience that is no one's experience. And if this is right, experiences cannot be understood as independent atoms. There must be a self. There must be something which has the experiences. And some people, they have done that. There are some approaches to the self, and some are still inside of this physicalist framework. And one of them is what people call emergentism. Okay? Emergentism is just the idea that from the proper base, some new powers, some new properties, qualities will emerge, but nothing new is added from the outside. So consciousness, thought, rational volition, and so on, they make their appearance naturally as a result of the structure and functioning of the human brain. So it is still an attempt to explain consciousness from a physicalist perspective. But we might ask, what does emerge? So William Haskell, he gives at least three possibilities. Mental events, properties, and conscious experience itself might emerge from the brain, right? The second, novel causal powers, so that now those mental states might causally affect the body. And third, the self, a self might emerge, something that has the experiences and exercises the causal powers. Okay, so it's a good instance of an attempt. Many people criticize this kind of approach. It has many problems. Okay, but it's an interesting way to see that people are getting more and more aware of the need of taking a self into account. And with that in mind, I finally, perhaps I have 3 more minutes. I finally get to what I call my contribution, that I call methodological dualism. So we have somehow like a case for dualism here. I won't explain, and I have already explained that we have a case for the methodological. Explanation should come first. Okay? So given that, we can propose what I call methodological dualism. It's just an idea, right? In the best spirit of philosophical speculation. So that could be defined as the view that as far as the explanation of mental phenomena is concerned, science is allowed to appeal to a substantial self, soul, or ego that is not identical to the body, and it is the bearer of personal identity and consciousness. So alike to methodological naturalism, also we don't make any ontological claim about the existence or non-existence of such an entity. But there is an asymmetry that we have to note here between methodological dualism and methodological naturalism, while methodological naturalism doesn't claim neither positively nor negatively about the existence of the non-physical. Methodological dualism, it makes a claim, a positive claim about the existence of non-physical. But it is a claim that should be understood from the perspective of explanation only. But we might wonder, is that possible at all? Okay. The first concern we might have is about the non-observable character of this self, right? Well, it is not observable from a third-person perspective, sure, but we might say, and might defend, it is observable, or at least we can experience it from a first-person perspective. Another way to answer that is to point out that in physics there are what philosophers call theoretical terms. They are terms which refer to non-observable entities like atoms and even forces, and we have dark matter and so on and so forth. So they are terms which are part of a theory, or at least they are implied by the theory. They have an explanatory role, okay, but they don't refer to anything that can be observed. So the fact that it can't be observed it does not imply automatically that it can't be used in a legitimate way in a theory. But this answer depends on the fact that it is not true right now that we have explanatorily successful dualist theories. Okay, the second reply. A second concern is whether or not explanation can be done without ontological commitment. We might wonder that. Is that possible? Well, from a naive perspective, I would say that it can't. Perhaps when a scientist puts forward his theory, he has some belief that the theory refers to something in reality. But from a more philosophical perspective, I would say that it can. It is possible. For instance, when we take a look at the debate about theoretical terms, some people say yes, they refer to real entities. Other people say they don't refer to real entities. So it's an open question whether or not these theoretical terms refer to something in reality. But still, these terms are used in the theories and they are accepted as scientific terms and so on and so forth. And finally, I will take just 1 or 2 more minutes. I know that my time is out. We might wonder that the consequences of that, we are rejecting methodological naturalism, a very successful methodology or strategy, but we are not rejecting methodological naturalism. We are rejecting a specific version of naturalism, which is physicalist naturalism. For instance, if we go back to my early definition of naturalism, there was another way to understand naturalism, which is called scientific naturalism. The idea that science should do, that the natural is what is started by science. So if by chance we have dualist theories which successfully explain consciousness, successfully explain mental phenomena, the very concept of the natural would be expanded, like Chalmers proposed, so as to include this idea that there is another self. Okay, finally, I'm going to conclude. So, repeating the main question, does dualism have a role to play in the project of rationally explaining consciousness? I'd say that it must have. First, we have, as I tried to show, a case for dualism. We have a case for the methodological, and I put forward this new concept of methodological dualism. But more, if we do accept Popper's idea of theoretical pluralism, if we have dualist theories and say by chance that they do successfully explain consciousness, so the very concept of the natural will be expanded, and then perhaps we go beyond dualism in the way that the physical and the mental, they will be obviously different, but at the same time they will belong to a larger, broader category, the category of the natural. So now perhaps we can take this as an instance of this old thesis, which is called Beda Beda. The idea is an Indian thesis or doctrine. The idea that reality is at the same time different and non-different. Okay, thank you so much for the attention.